Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to bring you the hidden stories that really shaped our world. So many of the critical turning points in history, they aren't found in headlines. They're often buried under, layers of complex, sometimes mutually mistrustful alliances. Today, we're unearthing one of those exact stories. We're taking a deep dive into Steve Coll's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Ghost Wars: The Secret History of the CIA, Afghanistan, and bin Laden, from the Soviet invasion to September 10, 2001. Our mission really is to give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We're extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge from this incredible work. We'll expose the critical, often unexamined assumptions and, the covert operations that inadvertently set the stage for these massive global shifts. We're talking particularly about the rise of al-Qaeda and ultimately the path to 9/11. Steve Coll he's uniquely positioned for this narrative. A Pulitzer Prize winner for explanatory journalism, former managing editor of the Washington Post. Plus, he covered Afghanistan as the Post's South Asia bureau chief. So he has this unparalleled understanding of the region. So let's unpack this secret history, shall we?
Absolutely. Call's book, it's just meticulous, almost like a forensic examination of how these really intricate relationships, often operating totally in the shadows, gradually brought about these, devastating and entirely unintended consequences. It really highlights how crucial knowledge is, and what happens when it's not fully understood or maybe not correctly applied.
That's a perfect way to frame it. Let's start at the very beginning then. Late 1970s, early 80s, the Soviet shadow first starts to fall over Afghanistan. What did things look like there?
Well, Afghanistan at that time, it was undergoing this communist revolution led by Nur Muhammad Taraki. He was a pretty ruthless leader, cultivated a brutal personality cult, even called himself the Great Teacher. His purges were merciless, apparently based on his reading of Lenin's teaching. It paints a grim, very authoritarian picture.
But what's so striking is that the Soviets themselves knew this wasn't exactly ideal, right?
That's the fascinating paradox, yeah. Internally, leaders like KGB Chief Andropov, head of their intelligence agency, they recognized Afghanistan was simply not ready for socialism. They cited its economic backwardness, the, overwhelming dominance of Islam, widespread illiteracy. All the signs were there. But despite this, pretty accurate assessment, they later intervened. Why? Because of much larger strategic fears. They worried about a potential new Great Ottoman Empire on their border and the risk of U.S. Pershing missiles aimed at the Soviet Union's southern underbelly. So their geopolitical anxieties, they kind of trumped their understanding of the local reality.
Okay, so while the Soviets are debating all this, how's America reacting? Were they jumping right in, or was it more cautious?
Initially, it was a lot of caution, which, basically translated to disengagement. President Carter found himself in a really difficult spot. His national security advisor, Brzezinski, wrote this internal memo, but it only cautiously predicted Afghanistan might become a Soviet Vietnam. And he pointed out key differences.
Like what?
Like the Afghan insurgency being poorly organized, lacking any real sanctuary, no central government. The U.S. just wasn't ready to commit.
And we get this really vivid, almost terrifying sense of that disengagement with the Islamabad embassy riot in '79. What exactly went down there?
Oh, it was chaos. A horrifying scene. Rioters stormed the U.S. compound in Islamabad, Pakistan. They were shouting things like, "Carter dog, kill the Americans." Inside, you had CIA officers like Gary Schroen and Bob Lassard frantically trying to burn classified documents, just trying to destroy evidence.
Right.
And a Marine corporal, Stephen Crowley, he was severely injured, hit by a brick and a pipe. That incident, it just powerfully underscored America's vulnerability and, frankly, their lack of preparedness. It showed they weren't equipped for the scale of unrest that was brewing.
That's a really stark image. And it totally reinforces what you said about the CIA's official position back then.
Precisely. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul, it had actually been closed since 1989. And Afghanistan wasn't even on the Islamabad station's operating directive, their OD.
So no resources allocated.
Basically, yeah. No formal resources for intelligence gathering there. It tells you everything about the agency's initial disengagement and limited capacity.
Okay, let's fast forward just a bit into the early 80s. We start to see a new approach from the U.S. Howard Hart arrives in Islamabad in '81. New CFA station chief. What made him different?
Hart was, a fascinating choice. He came from this working-class Midwestern background, which was a stark contrast to the usual, Ivy League graduates who typically filled the CIA's ranks back then.
It's a real shift then.
It represented a shift in recruitment, bringing in different perspectives. One of his first big moves was a clandestine meeting with an Afghan rebel commander, Abdul Haq. That signaled a more direct, though still very covert, engagement.
And this is where that really complex relationship with Pakistan's ISI, their inter-services intelligence, starts to solidify, isn't it?
Oh, it becomes absolutely vital and incredibly complicated. ISI, under General Akhtar Abdur Rahman, they strictly controlled all contact with the Afghan rebels.
No exceptions.
None. No American CIA or otherwise was allowed to cross into Afghanistan. ISI handled all the weapons distribution, all the training, and this arrangement, it massively amplified ISI's power. It let them enforce Zia's martial law, even discreetly monitor Pakistan's secret nuclear program.
Wow, really?
Yeah, intelligence on which Hart's agents were, and Coll quotes this, amazingly successful and disturbing in collecting. So you had this really powerful intermediary, which, well, it would prove to have some pretty problematic long-term consequences.
And it wasn't just Pakistan. Saudi Arabia also played this crucial but often overlooked role. What was their involvement?
Right. Saudi Arabia's General Intelligence Department, the GID, it had deep royal family connections. Prince Turki al-Fazal became its long-serving director. And here's a striking detail. Ahmed Badib, who was actually Osama bin Laden's former teacher, he became chief of staff to the GID director.
No kidding. That's close.
It's a small world detail with, huge implications down the line.
So this Saudi-Pakistani alliance, it was really clandestine at its core.
Absolutely. Rooted in shared Islamic identity, mutual security interests, and the Saudi funding. It was pivotal. It provided the crucial financial backing that kept the Afghan jihad going. This created this powerful kind of opaque network of support that would have these lasting unintended repercussions for global security.
Okay, moving into the mid-1980s now, things really escalate. CIA Director William Casey enters the picture. He's got this fervent anti-communist vision. He wasn't just interested in tying down the Soviets, was he? He wanted to, drive them out completely.
Yeah, Casey's vision got formalized in this thing called National Security Decision Directive 166, or NSDD 166. That became the legal basis for a massive escalation of the CIA's role.
What did that mean in practice?
It meant advanced U.S. military technology flowing in, intensified training of Islamist guerrillas in sabotage techniques, even targeted attacks on Soviet military officers. This pushed the CIA into what some career officers apparently called the gray fields of assassination and terrorism. It caused significant unease. The core insight here is the U.S. shifted. They went from just supporting an insurgency to actively trying to win the war, pretty much by any means necessary.
And a huge game changer during this time, the Stinger missile, deployed September '86. How did that change things on the ground?
Oh, the Stinger was a technological marvel. It genuinely tipped the balance. Deployed by commanders like Engineer Ghaffar, its heat-seeking system was just impervious to Soviet countermeasures. It effectively neutralized their air superiority.
Just like that.
Pretty much. This single weapon transformed the battlefield. And what's also surprising, kind of a side note, is the CIA's propaganda efforts around then. They actually commissioned an Uzbek exile to translate and print thousands of Korans in Uzbek, distributed them into Soviet Central Asia. Sort of a psychological weapon starting back in December '84.
Wow. Okay, so amidst all this, you have commanders like Ahmed Shah Massoud, the line of Panjshir. He stood out, had his own effective strategies, but there's a surprising detail about him too, isn't there?
Yeah, Massoud was incredibly pragmatic. I mean, sure, he used captured Soviet weapons and uniforms from convoys on the Ceylon Highway, standard stuff, but he also negotiated an unprecedented truce directly with the Soviets in 1983.
A truce with the Soviets.
Secret talks. Apparently, he and his counterparts conversed like colleagues, a fact that, understandably, shocked a lot of Afghans. It just highlights the complex, often contradictory nature of the conflict. Internal dynamics didn't always line up with the external objectives.
And this period also marks the real ascendance of Osama bin Laden, right?
It absolutely does. You have Abdullah Azzam founding his Office of Services, Maktab al-Qidamat, to aid the Afghan jihad. And his former pupil, Osama bin Laden, becomes this crucial financier and operations partner starting around 1984. He was even offering to pay like $300 a month for Arab volunteers to come fight.
$300 a month.
Yeah. And the Office of Services even opened its first U.S. office in Tucson, Arizona, which is a detail that always kind of surprises people.
His son. Wow.
Critically, bin Laden quickly developed this distrust of Pakistan's official ISI. He preferred to funnel his initial charity through private religious and political networks. Networks like Jamaat Islami, the Pakistani branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, remember them, the influential Islamist group infamous for sacking the U.S. Embassy back in '79.
Right.
So this preference, combined with Saudi charities building madrasas, religious schools, and the rise of Wahhabi activism, that conservative branch of Sunni Islam, especially in border regions, well, it laid the groundwork for future threats that were much less controllable.
That detail about bin Laden's distrust of ISI, that seems crucial. It speaks to the underlying fragility of all these alliances, doesn't it?
Exactly. And this whole period is perfectly captured by Pakistani President Zia's cynical view of the U.S. alliance. He famously likened it to living on the banks of an enormous river, wonderful for its fertile soil, he said, but you always risk being left alone in a desert every 4 or 8 years.
Oof, that is hard.
Doesn't it? It just perfectly captures the fragile transactional nature of these partnerships. Deep trust was always scarce, which ultimately allowed these more autonomous and more dangerous networks to just flourish.
So the Soviets finally withdraw in 1989. U.S. policy shifts. Officially, it's about promoting Afghan self-determination. How did that actually play out?
Well, it was messy. It led to significant internal policy conflicts right inside the U.S. government. You had Edmund McWilliams, the State Department Special Envoy, independently reporting on how ISI was manipulating Afghan politics, actively favoring one faction, Hekmatyar, and eliminating rivals.
But the CIA saw it differently.
Totally differently. Milt Bearden, the CIA station chief at the time, dismissed McWilliams as that evil little person. Bearden firmly believed, and this is a quote, there was no such thing as a political Afghanistan separate from Pakistan just because a few white guys drew a line in the sand.
Wow. That's a fundamental disagreement.
It's huge. About Afghanistan's true nature and the role of external powers, especially Pakistan.
And it wasn't just American officials who had concerns. Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto herself didn't trust ISI. She knew her phones were tapped, knew they were fomenting opposition against her.
That's a really key point. And then the CIA's legal authority for covert action in Afghanistan, it effectively ended on January 1st, 1992. The agency's focus then turned to things like a stinger buyback program and drug trafficking. The liaison with ISI deteriorated by the week. The CIA just had little to offer anymore.
So a vacuum.
A massive vacuum of intelligence and influence, yeah. Just as these new threats were starting to emerge in really unexpected ways.
And emerge, they did. Directly linked, in some ways, to that initial CIA support. This is where Ramzi Youssef first comes onto the scene.
Yes, Ramzi Youssef, an Arab speaker from the Persian Gulf. He trained at Kuldin, one of those Arab jihadist camps, and he learned bomb-making techniques originally supplied by the CIA to ISI.
The blowback.
Exactly. His chilling goal in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, topple one tower onto the other, aiming for 250,000 deaths. He compared that figure to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His rationale was chillingly simple. If direct attacks on Israel were too hard, then attack a friend of your enemy.
A clear warning signal.
Absolutely. It exposed the unintended consequences, the blowback of those earlier covert operations.
So how did the U.S. counterterrorism apparatus react to this? Were they ready?
Not really. The CIA's Counterterrorist Center, the CTC, founded by Duane Claridge, it initially struggled. It had this kind of defensive mentality, faced budget cuts, and was mainly focused on secular terrorist groups, like Palestinian factions. Plus, there was the significant internal debate. Was terrorism a national security problem needing a war-like response, or was it a law enforcement problem?
Which would limit the CIA's role.
Exactly, because the CIA was prohibited from domestic policing. This distinction, this debate, critically hampered the early responses to religiously motivated groups like al-Qaeda.
And while the U.S. is debating internally, Kabul itself is just spiraling into chaos.
Oh, indeed. By 1993, Kabul plunged into horrific violence deprivation. You had rival mujahideen factions, Masood, Hekmatyar, Sayyaf, Dostum, fighting these brutal artillery duels, committing atrocities. Thousands of civilians died. The country was literally tearing itself apart, creating this desperate power vacuum.
And right out of that chaos emerges the Taliban.
Exactly. The Taliban rose from Kandahar in 1994, led by Mullah Omar. Interestingly, Hamid Karzai actually contributed $50,000 and a large cache of weapons to them in their very early days.
Karzai did?
Yeah. And Pakistani involvement was extensive. Their interior ministry supplied early weapons, ISI had contacts. often bypassing Prime Minister Bhutto, who resisted their militancy.
Oh.
What's critical is how the U.S. saw them initially. The embassy in Islamabad viewed the Taliban as this isolated Afghan mystery, an enigma. They said their origins and sponsors remain unclear, largely because America's intelligence resources in the region were so limited by then, and the Taliban were masters of disingenuity and a degree of deception in early meetings.
It's amazing. And during this time, the U.S. private sector, surprisingly, had more direct contact with the government itself. Unocal, the oil company, had this incredibly ambitious pipeline project.
Yeah, Marty Miller, Unocol's project head, he called it a moonshot. The plan was to connect Central Asian oil and gas all the way to the Indian Ocean through Afghanistan. Unocal had these high-level lobbying contacts back in Washington, pushing for a security alliance with the U.S. government to protect their potential investment.
Did they talk to the Taliban?
Miller did. He directly engaged with the Taliban, asking them to sign a non-binding agreement for the pipeline. They refused. But his direct contact was, well, more focused than that of U.S. officials at the time. There's this great anecdote where Miller was so relieved to leave Afghanistan, he apparently kissed the ground and did a little dance of celebration.
I don't blame him. This period also saw the Taliban imposing really extreme social restrictions, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. In areas they conquered, they enforced forced burqa wearing, had severe punishments for women washing clothes in rivers, and infamously, the destruction of the ancient Buddha statues in Bamiyan in 2001, Mullah Omar just dismissed it, saying, "All we are breaking are stones." It really illustrates their ideology, their disregard for cultural heritage, for established norms. It was another clear warning sign, frankly.
Okay, the stage is now set for a really major shift. Osama bin Laden moves from Sudan to Afghanistan in 1996. The Taliban provide him sanctuary, notably at Tarnak Farm near Kandahar Airport.
This was a critical turning point, and the Saudi position on this, it was ambiguously unhelpful, to put it mildly. Prince Turki al-Faisal made it clear he would not confront the Taliban over bin Laden. Apparently, the Saudi royal family still believed it was, quote, better to have bin Laden at large in Afghanistan than at home in detention or in jail, where he might become a magnet for anti-royal dissent.
Wow, that turned out to be a profound miscalculation.
Huge, with truly global consequences.
So from this sanctuary, bin Laden's activities just rapidly escalate, financing Islamist violence across North Africa, training foreign volunteers. Then, in 1997, George Tenet becomes the new director of Central Intelligence, the DCI. He's focused on improving the CIA's internal health, focusing on basics, and he has an early success story.
He did. The successful black op to capture Mir Amal Qasi. He was the guy who shot CIA employees outside headquarters in 1993. It involved Afghan tribal fighters, satellite tech, culminating in this dramatic hotel raid in Multan, Pakistan. Gary Schroen, who was there, called it a totally successful mission. Tenet triumphantly announced to CIA staff, no terrorist should sleep soundly as long as this agency exists. A real morale booster.
So this Qasi capture, it became a kind of blueprint, a new way forward maybe.
Exactly. It became the model for a plan to capture bin Laden himself. The idea was map his Kandahar world using satellites, secure a desert airstrip for American special operations teams, then have tribal agents literally snatch bin Laden. This was deemed legally acceptable because Afghanistan was considered effectively ungoverned. It showed a proactive approach was taking shape, even if it was still constrained.
But then comes the chilling 1998 Anti-American Manifesto, issued by bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri was bin Laden's new ally and a former personal enemy of the Egyptian government. What was its significance?
Well, al-Zawahiri's manifesto specifically called to target the distant enemy. That meant the U.S., and it included graphic instructions for killing them with a single bullet, a stab, or a device. This was a clear, unambiguous declaration of war, directly naming the United States. No more ambiguity.
How did the Clinton administration respond to this escalating threat?
Well, Richard Clarke at the National Security Council, he pushed hard for action. He saw the danger. But Clinton himself, he was preoccupied with other global threats, weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. He often viewed terrorism as a challenge to be managed, not solved, not really a war that cannot be won.
A management problem, not an existential threat yet.
Sort of. The focus, for example, during the big Blair House exercise on WMDs really highlighted where their priorities lay, and this led to a really significant missed opportunity. After the African embassy bombings in '98, bin Laden was tracked to the Haji Habash house in Kandahar. He was near a mosque, and there were apparently 52 stingers present at the location. Gary Schroen sent an urgent message, Hit him tonight.
But they didn't.
Clinton hesitated. The intelligence confidence was apparently only 50%, and there was real fear of civilian casualties near the mosque. The attack was called off. That decision, Coll suggests, weighed really heavily on many people involved afterwards.
Then in 1999, the experimental Predator drone enters the scene. It captures these eerie images of bin Laden. That must have generated some excitement.
Oh, Tenet was certainly enthusiastic about its potential, yeah. However, both the Pentagon and the CIA were reluctant to actually use the Predator for military action, not without better intelligence and a great deal of lead time. They cited the risks of shoot-downs, these things were slow, and the high costs.
Whether the tech was promising.
But the operational challenges, risk aversion, they were significant hurdles. The technology wasn't quite ready for primetime action. We also see another Pakistani gambit around then, in '99. Prime Minister Sharif offered to train commandos to snatch bin Laden. ISI chief Ziauddin even met with the CIA.
What happened with that?
Aborted. General Pervez Musharraf launched his coup against Sharif, and the plan just died. More instability, more missed chances.
And all this time, Ahmed Shah Massoud is still issuing these urgent warnings.
Massoud was like Cassandra, wasn't he? His warnings just largely went unheeded. In 1998, he made direct appeals to the U.S. Senate, warning that Afghanistan was being delivered to fanatics, extremists, terrorists, mercenaries, drug mafias, and he explicitly denounced Pakistan's role in undermining this just victory over the Soviets. These were incredibly prescient warnings coming from someone who knew the ground truth.
Which brings us back to Pakistan's enduring double game. Pervez Musharraf takes over. Military background, saw jihad tied to India.
Right. Pakistan engaged in what Coll calls a cynical charm offensive in 2000. They offered to crack down on minor al-Qaeda elements, but they were still actively supporting the Taliban behind the scenes. The CIA even tried to build a personal connection with the new ISI chief, Mahmoud Ahmed, the guy who later enabled the 9/11 hijackers' funding. They even gave him a tour of the Gettysburg battlefield, trying to build rapport. But Mahmoud's duplicity was clear. He'd apparently bluffed Mullah Omar about U.S. threats, while Pakistan just continued its covert support for the Taliban. This deeply ingrained double game where Pakistan constantly balanced its own strategic interests against its alliances, well, it ultimately proved fatal.
Okay, the Bush administration takes office, 2001. Tenet stays on as DCI. Cofer Black is the new head of the Counterterrorist Center, the CTC. He immediately prioritizes getting an armed Predator drone, wants to reduce the sensor-to-shooter timeline.
Right, but despite successful Hellfire missile tests on the Predator, it actually wasn't sent back to Afghanistan for reconnaissance right away.
Why not?
The Taliban had identified its conspicuously slow radar signature. Shootdowns were likely and very costly, about $1.5 million per drone. Analysts even suggested satellite imagery could do virtually as well. So the practical hurdles of deploying this new tech against a now-aware enemy proved significant. Time was just running out.
Diplomatic pressure on Pakistan is increasing, though, early 2001. Officials are urging Musharraf to resolve the OBL problem, especially as the Taliban kept spinning off in new and bizarre directions, like destroying those Buddha statues. Finally, President Bush shifts gears. Spring 2001. He directs his team to play offense, makes the destruction of al-Qaeda the top U.S. objective. But it was far too late, wasn't it?
Way too late. While these policy shifts were finally happening in Washington, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's ambitious plan for 9/11 was already well underway. His original plan was even bigger, hijacking 10 passenger jets, hitting multiple iconic American targets, White House, Pentagon, CIA headquarters, World Trade Center towers.
10 jets, my God. The Hamburg self-pilots, they'd already traveled to Kandahar back in '99, then went to U.S. flight schools. And the muscle hijackers.
The Muscle 15 Saudis, some apparently with histories of depression, even alcoholism, who underwent this sudden radicalization. They entered the U.S. by mid-July 2001. And here's a critical intelligence failure Coll points out. One of them, Al-Mihar, had a valid U.S. visa. He was not on the official terrorist watch list, despite internal CIA warnings about him.
How does that happen?
It demonstrates a systemic breakdown. Information sharing failures, watch listing problems, the dots weren't connected.
And as a final, just tragic warning, Ahmed Shah Massoud, in August 2001, is still desperately urging the U.S. to punish the Taliban. exert American pressure on Pakistan.
His warnings went unheeded right until the devastating end. On September 9th, 2001, just 2 days before 9/11, al-Qaeda operatives posing as journalists detonated a bomb during an interview with Massoud. The explosion tore the cameraman's body apart, killed Massoud instantly. His aides, in total shock, immediately started strategizing how to protect the Panjshir Valley from the Taliban onslaught they knew was coming.
And in one final chilling detail from Coll's book, the Bush administration's Deputies Committee met on September 10, 2001. They approved a 3-year plan to overthrow the Taliban if diplomacy failed, the September 10th. Just hours before the 9/11 attacks, they were finally, officially ready to act. The irony is just stark.
It really is. This deep dive into ghost wars, it truly reveals this history shaped by unbelievably complex, often contradictory relationships, intense internal intelligence struggles, and, fundamentally, a misunderstanding of the threats that were emerging. What's maybe most provocative to think about is how those unexamined assumptions like political Afghanistan being somehow separate from Pakistan, or the fluctuating commitment to counterterrorism, the fragmented way intelligence was collected, how all that collectively allowed the distant enemy to grow. It just illustrates the profound, devastating consequences when alliances are built on mistrust, and when clear warnings go unheeded until it's tragically too late.
Indeed. This isn't just history, it's a profound lesson, really. We encourage you, listening, to reflect on how these complex histories continue to shape our present and our future. What lessons from ghost wars resonate most deeply for you today? Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.